Hey there, hello there, Chef Cutter Donald welcoming you to another Cutter historical video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 news events in the year of my birth, 1985, as many moments happened that caused the world to stand still and all that. The threat of the Cold War and a lot of tension over in Africa and pretty much everywhere in the world. Now, we will not be talking about wars and all that because the Cold War, there wasn't really much to talk about the Cold War stuff in 1985, except that Gorbachev became the Soviet leader. But that's not the big stuff. There is going to be a few items to do with politics and all that that I try my best not to hit, but it is what it is. So these are 10 great moments. And if you're thinking that I'm going to be filling it with sports stuff, that's actually incorrect. I have a top 10 for sports and all that. So let's get going with number 10. And number 10 is the first major earthquake of the year. On March 3rd, 1985, in central Chile, an earthquake measuring 8.0 on the Richter scale hit. It it actually fell into a 10-day period of moderate and non-destructive for shocks. But 177 people died and 2,500 were injured and all that. The financial losses were huge because it reached about 1.5 to 1.8 billion in American dollars. So a lot of people were shocked about this whole thing and all that. It was very intense and all that. So the casualty, a lot of people state from 177 to 200 were dead as a result of this earthquake. And the Chilean earthquake was massive and all that. A lot of people were shocked by it. But trust me when I say that this earthquake was cupcakes compared to the next earthquake on the list. It's not at number 9, but there'll be another earthquake. At number 9 is a famous sports event. Now, you would be thinking, is pro wrestling really a sport? I say yes. Some say yes, some say no. But WrestleMania 1 was a major event in the sports world because it actually combined pro wrestling with entertainment and all that. Although earlier in 1985 there was a event that MTV co-produced with the World Wrestling Federation, the war to settle the score, in which Roddy Piper would face Hulk Hogan for the WWE Championship, but there would be some misconceptions. WrestleMania 1 brought celebrities into the wrestling world, as Cyndi Lauper would actually be coming out with Wendy Richter in her women's championship match against Lele Kai with the Fabulous Moolah in her corner. Um, Many matches were hit. King Kong Bundy beat SD Jones in 9 seconds, which was the fastest WrestleMania match until The Rock did a 4-second match in 2016 against Eric Rowan. And of course, well, the main event had a lot of celebrities. Billy Martin is a ring announcer. Um, Muhammad Ali as a ringside enforcer. Liberace was there too as guest timekeeper. And of course, Mr. T pairing up with Hulk Hogan in a tag match between them and the team of Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Unfortunately, though, for the bad guys, Orndorff and Piper lost when Cowboy Bob Orton, who was affiliated with those two bad guys, actually decided to jump off and hit someone with a cast, but hit his own teammate. So basically, the good guys won, and Hogan and T were fantastic. Of course, it was only a few days after Hogan accidentally put Richard Bowser on the floor uh, on his TV show Hot Properties with a chin lock. Bowser did get some money and bought a place in France called Chez Hogan. At number 8 is the trying too hard and not realizing the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as New Coke came into North America. and all that. Coke was losing out to Pepsi in taste tests, so they were trying a brand new formula, breaking off from the traditional formula they had since the 1870s. So basically, Coke decided to try to be more hip and get to a younger generation and change everything up. Even Bill Cosby would sing its praises. Of course, we all know about the Bill Cosby thing, but other than that, it was still pretty good. And all that new Coke seemed to be a good idea. Unfortunately, though, it was watered down in a sense. People were just not buying into it, and Pepsi was getting a big boost in the cola sales. After all, they had Michael Jackson for a commercial. So Coke decided after 3 months to get rid of the new formula and go back to the old formula. And as time went by, Coca Cola did get some feedback in the positives. At number 7 is a Canadian entry, I know, but this was an important one. To set this up into context, in 1980, Terry Fox, a amputee runner, decided to run across the country of Canada from St. John's to Vancouver, or attempted to. Unfortunately, he would be stopped in Thunder Bay by the cancer coming back in his body and him dying from it September 1st, 1980. But anyway, this guy, Rick Hansen, he came up with a plan to decide to do a worldwide tour with him, even though he was in a wheelchair. He was a paraplegic. He decided to try to wheelchair stuff all around the world and try to raise money for spinal cord research and all that. It actually seemed like a very good idea and all that. That Rick Hansen knew what he was doing when he was doing everything. So that was just amazing what he did and all that. His journey ended 2 years later in 1987, but this was the start of something big. Also to note that Steve Fonyo, another amputee runner, tried to run across Canada in 1985. He actually did. Unfortunately, though, his post marathon thing actually ruined him and cost him his Order of Canada. And number 6 is the biggest thing about the ozone layer. A lot of people don't really look at environmental issues and all that, or care not to look. However, 1985 was the year that they finally decided to get the ozone layer depletion stuff down pat, and scientists learned about the ozone layer being depleted. That meant that, you know, them trying the invisible halo around the Earth could be penetrated and all that, which meant that, it set the stage for hotter temperatures, terrible climates, and the melting of ice caps up north and on the North Pole and the South Pole. So basically, science proved that the ozone layer was something to look forward to and try to protect it at all costs. At number 5 was the second earthquake on this list, another 8.0 magnitude quake. This happened September 19th, 1985, in the greater Mexico City area that caused the deaths of not over 200 people, but 5,000 people. There was a massive aftershock. There were two large aftershocks. September 20th, the next day, was a 7.5 magnitude quake, and on April 30th of 1986, there was a 7.0 magnitude located around the Middle America Trench. The event cost an estimated 3 to 5 billion American dollars in damage, as many people were seriously injured, and the buildings were collapsing and all that. So anyway, the earthquake was huge. It was off of the Pacific into the Pacific Ocean, but it was still massive and all that. The earthquake was even felt as far away as Los Angeles and Houston in the U.S. It was just huge and all that. The damage was to buildings and really had a massive aftermath and all that. Localization and all that. You could see the damages and all that. Of course, a lot of people dispute the death toll, but still the response was not the greatest because the Mexican government actually didn't do too well and all that and all that. So anyway, that's what ended up happening in Mexico City. And that earthquake almost cost Mexico the 1986 World Cup because, rumors were Colombia was going to be hosting the 1986 World Cup of soccer, but unfortunately they had an earthquake hit, so they moved it to Mexico, and Mexico was in danger of losing that as well, that thing because of their earthquake, but they managed to keep it going. At number 4 is the brand new video game system in America called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Japan was giving America a great video game system. Of course, there was a massive video game crash the previous few years as Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision, and a lot of other companies would fall flat in the great video game crash, with ET being a very terrible video game. It was a decent concept, but unfortunately, it was hard as hell, and it had lots of glitches and all that. So practically, Pac-Man was not doing too well, so they buried the cartridges in New Mexico. So over in Japan, there's something called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo was once a playing card company, among other things, but they decided to make video games, and they had some great things, just Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. They would port the system over to America in late 1985, and it worked out. Super Mario Brothers, one of the best games of all time. You think about all the great games on the NES: Tetris, Duck Hunt, um, Metroid, and all that. My brother had a Nintendo Entertainment System, and I would love playing. Try to play Super Mario Brothers and beat Super Mario Brothers on it, and also play Blades of Steel among other NES games. And number 3 was the famous discovery of September 2nd off the coast of Newfoundland of the great ship Titanic. In 1912, it set off from England towards New York. It was a big luxury liner, lots of celebrities and all that. Rich people were there, and it looked great and all that. It was supposed to be unsinkable. Unfortunately, though, many mistakes were made in Titanic's design, including not enough light bulbs for people, a perceived loss of binoculars, and failure to detect icebergs. Obviously, the ship went down and more than 3,000 people lost their lives. There were survivors. Nevertheless, in 1985, a mini sub finally found the Titanic and decided to look at things, and it was pretty impressive. See what the Titanic was there and all that. So, yeah, and it brought together a movie in 1997 starring Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, which is still one of the most talked about and most winnable Academy Award winning movies of all time. At number 2 was one of the worst bombings of a plane in history, and that was the Air India Flight 182 that on June 23rd, 1985, on a route from Montreal, Canada to London, UK, to Delhi, India, to Mumbai, India, disintegrated over the Atlantic Ocean because of a bomb planted by Canadian Sikh terrorists and all that. It was the first leg from Montreal to London, and the remnants of the aircraft fell 190 kilometers off the coast of Ireland, killing all 329 people on board. This was the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history and was actually the biggest aviation terrorism loss of life till 9/11. Anyway, the mastermind behind the Canadian what the bombing was a British Canadian national Sikh by the name of Inderjit Singh Riat, who pled guilty in 2003, and also Talwinder Singh Parmar, a Sikh separatist leader. So it was just humongous and all that. The only person convicted was Inderjit, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for assembling the bombs, which was shocking. That he only got 15 years in jail and all that. So this was the most expensive trial in Canadian history, costing $130 million. The two accused were actually acquitted and found not guilty. And then there were a lot of reports and all that. There was actually some mistakes by the government of Canada, the RCMP, and CSIS, which is the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, to allow this to frickin' happen in the first place. Of course, this was the whole thing about Indira Gandhi and not recognizing Sikhs wanting to separate from Punjab and all that. It's kind of messy and all that. So there were a lot of things and all that. The legacy was not good for Canada and all that. So anyway, you know, Paul Martin, who was our Canadian Prime Minister in 2005, said that make no mistake, the flight may have been Air India's. It may have taken place off the coast of Ireland, but this is a Canadian tragedy and all that. There was actually a man who was accused of carrying it out, Rapundan Singh Malik, but he was shot outside his family business, I guess for some, I don't know, thing going on. But nevertheless, this was one of the worst tragedies in history. And finally, number one was the main event that brought 1985 together and brought countries together and time zones together. It was Live Aid in response to the Ethiopian famine. The famine started in 1983 and went through to 1985. The first major stepping stone to Live Aid was the charity single Do They Know It's Christmas in 1984 by a lot of British um, acts. However, in January 1985, it was the Americans' turn, with American celebrities saying, We are the world, and all that. Well, Live Aid was there on Saturday, July 13th, 1985. It would be held at Wembley in London and JFK Stadium in Philly. However, there were actually other concerts, such as in the Soviet Union, Canada, Japan, Yugoslavia, Australia, and West Germany. Over 1.9 billion people watched the live broadcast, about 40%, and all that. So, anyway, it actually worked out. There were lots of British money to NGOs in Ethiopia, but it was alleged that it actually was funded towards the Ethiopian government and the weapons were guns. But yeah, there were a lot of mass things and all that. So the performances were big. Uh, in London at 12 Eastern Time, the Coldstream Guards did God Save the Queen. Status Quo played their song Rock and Roll Around the World. Style Council doing You're the Best Thing. The Boomtown Rats doing I Don't Like Mondays. Adamant doing the song Viva La Rock. Ultra Fox doing One Small Day. Spandau Ballet doing True. Elvis Costello saying All You Need Is Love. Nick Kershaw doing Don Quixote, among others. Sade doing Why Can't We Live Together. Sting alongside Phil Collins and Branford Marsalis were in London and they sang, well, songs like Roxanne, Against All Odds, Message in a Bottle, In the Air Tonight, and Every Breath You Take. Howard Jones did Hide and Seek. Brian Ferry did Slave to Love. Paul Young did Every Time You Go Away. U2 did Sunday Bloody Sunday. Dire Straits did Money for Nothing. Queen did their set of Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio Gaga, AO, Hammer to Fall, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, We Will Rock You, and We Are the Champions. David Bowie doing Rebel Rebel and Heroes, among others. The Who doing My Generation, Pinball Wizard, and Won't Get Fooled Again. Elton's thing doing I'm Still Standing. Benny and the Jets, Rocket Man, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. And Paul McCartney even doing Let It Be. In Philadelphia, Bernard Watson performed All I Really Want to Do. Joan Baez performed We Are the World. The Hooters did And We Danced. Four Tops sang the song I Can't Help myself, and Reach Out, I'll Be There. Great songs. Billy Ocean doing Caribbean Queen and Loverboy. Black Sabbath doing Iron Man and Paranoid. Run DMC doing King of Rock. Rick Springfield doing State of the Heart. REO Speedwagon, Can't Fight This Feeling. Crosby, Stills and Nash doing Teach Your Children. Judas Priest doing You've Got Another Thing Coming. Brian Adams doing Summer of '69. The Beach Boys doing California Girls, Help Me Rhonda, Good Vibrations, and Surfing USA. George Thorogood doing The Sky is Crying. Simple Minds doing Don't You Forget About Me. The Pretenders doing Back on the Chain Gang. Santana doing songs. Ashburn and Simpson doing Reach Out and Touch Somebody's Hand. Madonna doing Holiday and Get Into the Groove. Tom Petty doing American Girl. Kenny Loggins sang Footloose. The Cars did Drive and Just When I Need It. Neil Young doing Helpless. The Power Station saying Get It On. Thompson Twins Hold Me Now. Eric Clapton doing Layla. Phil Collins doing Against All Odds and In the Air Tonight, his second performance of the night. Led Zeppelin doing Stairway to Heaven. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young doing Daylight Again. Duran Duran doing A Few to a Kill in The Reflex. Patti LaBelle doing Stir It Up. Hall Notes doing Man Eater and My Girl. Mick Jagger doing Miss You and State of Shock. Bob Dylan, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood doing Blowing in the Wind, and then everyone said We Are the World. So that was all. This was precious and all that. So anyway, that's what 1985 was all about. And I'm Jeff Domino.